Zoro is one of those characters with insanely unbreakable resolve. He's strong, quiet, and reliable. The kind of person you don't really question. That was my read for a while. Damn, this guy's pretty cool. But the more I watched him, the harder he became to describe. Mosshead three-sword user who is directionally challenged. Extremely. For One Piece standards, that's not even weird. But for someone so distinct, I expected to understand him better. But I don't. Zoro's never really been assigned a role by Luffy, but somehow he just is the vice captain. So the question started to bug me. Who really is Roronoa Zoro? To figure that out, we have to look at what he actually does. Because his best moments aren't the ones you remember. They're the ones quietly keeping everything else from falling apart. When we look at what Zoro does, the answer is pretty muddy at first, because this dude doesn't act like a vice captain at all. For example, when Luffy, Nami, and Zoro first meet Usopp, they introduce each other over a meal, and Zoro is just zoning out, casually eating his food like a child, beer in his hands, not engaged at all with the group. Is this really the guy that's going to be the greatest swordsman? He's so laid back, almost as if he's a background character. Where's the Zoro that's rumored to be a demon in human skin? He doesn't look like a leader, but he acts like one in a way that's easy to miss. Zoro isn't trying to stand out. He carries himself in a way where it doesn't matter if he's the center or not. He doesn't compete for attention. He just exists as himself. Self-contained. And if you think about it, every group has someone like that. The person who balances everything out without drawing attention to themselves. What's strange is that Zoro isn't even always around. More often than not, he's training, alone. And when he's not training, he's sleeping, alone. Yet he's still one of the most important people there. It works because he minimizes unnecessary chaos. That's incredibly difficult to pull off. Most people offload pressure through venting, needing attention, or leaning on others for responsibility. Zoro does the opposite. He carries it himself. Labeling him as chill doesn't quite do him justice. Asleep or not, he's always on guard to protect his crew and ship. He's low maintenance, but when it matters, he's high impact. To see why this matters, imagine the opposite. Zoro already started with a reputation as a dangerous bounty hunter. If someone like that constantly acted superior or intimidating, everyone around him would feel on edge. That kind of presence destabilizes a group, but Zoro doesn't do that. He's strong enough to use his strength in a way that signals responsibility without making anyone else feel small. And that's why, even though he's so independent, he never feels out of place. If anything, he makes everything feel more stable. So the real question is, where did this come from? Because people don't just become this self-contained out of nowhere. At some point, Zoro learned that whatever he carries, he has to carry it himself. Zoro's childhood starts simple. He wants to be the greatest swordsman. No big reason. Something all little boys strive for, being cool and strong. But it doesn't stay simple for long. He loses, over and over again. He gets slapped around by a prodigy in his dojo, Kuina. Zoro can't even touch her. 2,000 losses and an astounding 0 wins. Objectively, he's already strong. A normal person would stop there. Except that some people are just naturally better. Zoro doesn't do that. He doesn't call it unfair or blame talent. He's still in the competition as long as his body is willing, so he trains even more. Because to Zoro, losing only means one thing. He's not strong enough yet. That's the only reason in Zoro's mind, nothing else. For years, it works well. They push each other forward, Kuina trying hard to not be overtaken, and Zoro chasing after her trying to catch up. Until Kuina breaks it. She admits she's afraid she'll lose someday, not because Zoro got stronger, but because she's a girl. And that messes everything up, because this whole time Zoro's been committed to one thing, working hard. All those losses, all that effort, why did they push each other so hard if none of it mattered? So Zoro rejects her idea. It's not a silly game or a phase that they go through. It was his purpose, so he just refuses to accept an outcome that says effort doesn't matter. The Kuina that he's been respecting this whole time is stronger than her fears, so he turns it into a promise, a real one. A challenge against each other to see who would become the greatest swordsman in the world, to prove their strength was something that they earned. Sadly, he never got to fulfill that dream. Kuina passes away in an accident, the literal day after they had just made that promise. And just like that, everything collapses. It affects Zoro deeply. The only times we see him cry is when he's frustrated at his own weakness. This one's different. He's mourning someone important to him, but also facing something he's never encountered before. Something that strength cannot fix. When he was met with a problem in the past, there was always a solution. He could train and improve. There was always a way forward. But there's no gap to close. Kuina is gone. And it starts to break the logic he's been living by. Maybe Kuina was right. All those losses, the effort, the promise they made. What was it for, if everything can just disappear like that? The one person that made Zoro's path feel real, just as they were getting to know each other better. So instead of letting it disappear, he turns that promise into something he carries alone. Becoming the strongest isn't something that he wants to do anymore. He has to do it. Up until now, Zoro fought with 2 swords, but after Kuina, he picks up a 3rd.
I leave her spirit and her dreams.
He takes her sword, the Wado Ichimonji, and carries her dream with him. A reminder that he can't afford to lose, because he's carrying more than just himself. For a long time, Zoro's personal vow was something to be carried alone, until he meets Luffy. So how does Zoro's worldview get shifted by one person? He isn't exactly the kind of person who would follow someone. He's strong in a very specific way. The kind of strength that comes from just enduring everything on your own. Then there's Luffy, someone who's also strong, but in a completely different way. Zoro's strength comes from pressure, from not being allowed to fail. Luffy, he's just free. He doesn't care about failure. He acts on what matters to him without hesitation. If you were to look at these two, they don't really seem that compatible. Zoro is disciplined, controlled. Luffy is reckless, unpredictable. They move through the world so differently that it doesn't make sense for them to stand on the same side. But then they see each other. Zoro is willing to starve for a promise, take punishment for someone weaker. He's someone that follows through no matter the cost. And Luffy, who's known him for less than a day, is willing to throw himself into that same situation without thinking twice. Punch someone he shouldn't, just for Zoro's sake. That's where they click. Not because they're similar, but because they both recognize the same thing in each other. Someone who follows their code even when it hurts. Someone willing to put their life on the line for what they believe in. That kind of understanding is instant. It doesn't need time. For Zoro, that changes everything. He's never really even seen someone like Luffy before. Someone who lives with the same kind of resolve, with a drive to move forward. Zoro doesn't need a reason. He can feel it in his bones. Even though Luffy's a reckless rubber idiot, he's real, and that's enough. What's even crazier is how quickly that respect shows. In the short time he travels with Luffy, he's already watching out for him. When they get separated, he trusts his captain will be fine. Not exactly. Luffy makes terrible decisions. He ends up trapped in a cage, and Nami, who Zoro hasn't even met yet, is about to be killed by Buggy's crew. Zoro steps in to save them and suffers a serious injury in the process. It's a bad situation. Luffy can't fight. Nami isn't a fighter. Zoro is already injured. There's no clean way out. Zoro doesn't even consider escaping on his own. He carries the cage Luffy's trapped in just so they can get out together. He's already losing blood, but he keeps going, fighting for his captain, trying to get them out alive, while being in the worst position himself. And this is after what? A couple days at most of knowing each other. A two-man pirate crew. That kind of loyalty is unheard of, almost idiotic. For Zoro, it's not even something he thinks about. Once he recognizes something real, he commits to it completely. But that doesn't mean he gives up on his own ambition. Zoro did say early on, if Luffy ever got in the way of his dream, he'd leave. Then Zoro finally meets Mihawk. And by finally, I mean really early in the story, like when Ash spots a Ho-Oh. The strongest swordsman in the world. The very thing he's been chasing this whole time. Zoro's confident as balls, rushing in with the intention of beating Mihawk. And then he gets destroyed. Played like a fiddle in the process, his 3 swords against a baby dagger. At some point, Zoro realizes it himself. The sheer gap between him and the top isn't even close to close. He knows he's going to lose, maybe even die. But he still doesn't step back. Stepping back would mean everything he's carried up until now, his promise, his vows, Kuina, wasn't absolute. So he keeps going. If he turns away here, then all of it becomes hollow. Luffy watches from the back. He knows Zoro can't win, but he doesn't interfere. Because stepping in would mean deciding for Zoro that his dream isn't worth dying for. And Luffy isn't for that, even as it's killing him to watch. Zoro puts everything he has into that fight. He lost, but in that fight, he proved that he was serious. Mihawk sees it. Zoro isn't chasing status or recognition. He's fighting for something he's been carrying for a long time, so he spares him. It feels like Mihawk is the one who changes Zoro, but it's Luffy that signals the shift. Because even after witnessing all of that, watching Zoro give it his all, almost die, Luffy never once steps in. He lets Zoro make that choice for himself. And when it's over, as Zoro loses, Luffy doesn't make it about that. He doesn't look at Zoro like he failed or shouldn't have even bothered trying. He just gets angry. All that tension from watching finally spills over, so he attacks Mihawk. That's new. Zoro's always carried everything on his own. If he failed, that was on him. If he suffered, that was his responsibility. That's just how he lived. But now there's someone else there. Someone who respects his dream enough to let him risk his life for it and still stand by him after. So in that moment, with what little strength Zoro has left, he makes a promise. He'll never lose again. Not just for himself, but for Kuina and the person he chose to stand behind. Because Luffy let Zoro carry his own weight, there are moments when Zoro has to do the same for him. Water 7 is one of those moments. Robin's missing, the Going Merry is dying, and the Straw Hats face a different kind of conflict. The group is turning on each other. Luffy versus Usopp. Zoro's role is small at first. He pushes for composure, hoping it can be resolved cleanly. But this kind of tension is new for them. And the breaking point is Usopp. He's always known he's been the weak link. He just never said it out loud. But when he loses the crew's 200 million berries, the money meant to fix the Merry, he's ashamed. He fears that he's holding everyone back. What if the crew doesn't mind letting him go, like Luffy is doing with the Merry? Because the Merry isn't just some ship. It's something they've been holding onto since the beginning. And now Luffy is saying, it's time to let it go. To Luffy, it's a necessary decision. To Usopp, it sounds like he's being replaced. Like if something becomes too damaged, too weak, it gets left behind. So Usopp reacts emotionally, calls Luffy a bad captain, rejects his decision, starts acting on his own. And no one knows how to stop it. It feels like something is breaking. The argument escalates to a duel. Usopp challenges Luffy, and Luffy accepts. To no surprise, Luffy wins by one-shotting Usopp. It's not a satisfying win, it's just heartbreaking. And Luffy is holding back hard tears. After all the silence, that's when Zoro steps in, not to comfort Luffy, but to steady him. Because if Luffy wavers here, everything they're built on starts to slip. Up until now, they've been able to act like a group of friends. But that only works when nothing is at stake. The moment it does, someone has to decide, and everyone else has to trust that decision. What Usopp did wasn't just emotional, he acted against the captain, the one carrying all of their dreams. If that line of respect doesn't hold, then nothing else does. Then they're just people sailing together, not a crew. That's what Zoro is protecting, not pride, not authority, but stability. And that's why he doesn't let it go later. When Usopp wants to come back, and everyone's ready to move on, pretend it didn't happen, Zoro holds the line. He already put his entire future in Luffy's hands. Part of that vow is making sure none of it falls apart, because strong bonds aren't built on good feelings alone. They're built on being able to trust each other when it matters. Zoro holds the line when things start to fall apart, even if it makes him the harsh one, even if no one else understands it. But there are moments when holding the line isn't enough, when what's at stake isn't just trust, but the entire crew, their lives, dreams, everything. By the time we get to Thriller Bark, the crew is already at their limit. Luffy is unconscious after fighting Gecko Moria. Everyone else is wiped. And then Kuma appears, making a straight line towards Luffy. Without so much of a warning, Zoro steps in to strike Kuma down. But immediately, Zoro knows that there's no winning this, so he offers something else, his own head in place of Luffy's. Zoro, who never bends, just take me instead. Kuma barely reacts, but he accepts on one condition: take all of Luffy's pain. Zoro agrees, away from everyone, and then nothing. The next time we see him, he's barely standing, covered in a pool of blood. Even Sanji is concerned for him, asking what happened. And in Zoro's response, nothing happened. And that's Zoro. He just never brings it up again. Zoro isn't just cool because he's strong. In Zoro's most badass moments, he's not even fighting. It's what he chooses to carry. He refuses to ever become a burden, so he becomes the one that holds everything together. Even to the point where he treats himself as replaceable, just to protect the crew that he considers isn't. And he does all of that without fanfare, without ego. He doesn't express what he's thinking, he doesn't ask for help, he doesn't need recognition. He just does what needs to be done. And we never really see what that feels like for him. It can't be that easy to carry so much alone. For someone who struggles with directions, Zoro is strangely certain about the weight he chooses to carry, and he never lets anyone in on it. So it makes me wonder, is Zoro actually okay carrying all of that? Does that weight ever tie down his heart? I don't really know. But maybe that's why he's always felt so hard to describe, because his most important moments are the ones where he says the least.